It was a cold, gray morning in the bustling city of Chicago when Valerie Davis walked into one of the flagship stores of Windcrest Retail, a well-known luxury goods chain. Dressed in a simple coat and jeans, with a wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, Valerie looked every bit like an ordinary customer. She had a calm demeanor, her sharp eyes scanning the aisles filled with gleaming displays of designer handbags, shoes, and jewelry. What nobody could guess by looking at her was that she was no ordinary customer. Valerie was the newly appointed CEO of Windcrest Retail, a position she had secretly assumed just 2 weeks ago. Today was her first visit to one of the stores, and she had chosen to do it incognito. Valerie believed in understanding her business from the ground up. She wanted to see firsthand how the stores operated and how customers were treated. But more importantly, she wanted to assess the company's culture, something she knew was vital to the long-term success of any organization. She had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, overcoming countless challenges as a Black woman in the fiercely competitive world of business. This role was not just another career milestone. It was her way of proving to herself and the world that change was possible. The store's opulence was unmistakable, with pristine marble floors and polished glass cases that reflected the soft golden glow of overhead chandeliers. The sales associates, dressed in sleek uniforms, moved around briskly, their polished smiles and impeccable manners creating an air of sophistication. Valerie's first impression was positive until she approached the counter near the center of the store. "Excuse me," she said politely to the sales associate standing behind the counter. The young woman, whose name tag read Chelsea, glanced up briefly before returning her attention to her phone. "Can I help you?" Chelsea asked, her tone flat and uninterested. Valerie ignored the lack of enthusiasm and gestured toward the display of handbags. "I'd like to take a closer look at that black leather tote, please." Chelsea sighed audibly, as if the request were an enormous inconvenience. Without a word, she unlocked the case and retrieved the handbag, placing it on the counter with a perfunctory thud. "There you go," Chelsea said, her eyes drifting back to her phone. Valerie's brow furrowed slightly, but she decided to give the associate the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps it was just a bad day. She examined the bag carefully, running her fingers over the fine stitching and supple leather. "It's beautiful. Could you tell me more about the craftsmanship? And does this come in any other colors?" Chelsea barely looked up. "What you see is what we have," she replied curtly. "If you're not interested, there are other customers waiting." Valerie's stomach churned with disbelief. The dismissive attitude was not just unprofessional, it was outright disrespectful. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, miss. Can I help you?" Valerie turned to see a man approaching. He was in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of authority. His name tag identified him as Greg, the store manager. Valerie offered him a polite smile. "Yes, I was just asking about this handbag," she explained. "I wanted to know more about the craftsmanship and color options." Greg's smile didn't reach his eyes. Instead, he glanced at Valerie's attire, his gaze lingering for a moment too long on her simple coat and worn boots. "I see," he said slowly. "Well, ma'am, this particular collection is quite exclusive. Perhaps something from our clearance section would be more suitable for you." The words hit Valerie like a slap. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice steady but firm. Greg's expression didn't waver. "I'm just trying to assist you in finding something within your price range," he said smoothly, though his tone was laced with condescension. The tension in the air was palpable. Valerie's mind raced. She had come to the store expecting to observe, to learn about the customer experience. What she had not anticipated was being subjected to the very kind of treatment she had spent her career fighting against. Her instinct was to walk away, but she knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she took a deep breath and fixed Greg with a steady gaze. "Thank you for your concern," she said evenly, "but I'll decide what's within my price range." Greg's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Of course," he said. "If you'll excuse me, I need to attend to other matters." As Greg walked away, Valerie felt a wave of frustration and disappointment wash over her. She glanced around the store, noticing for the first time the subtle yet telling interactions between the staff and customers. People who looked like her received less attention, shorter smiles, and a distinct lack of enthusiasm. It was clear that bias was ingrained in the store's culture, and Valerie knew she couldn't ignore it. Over the next hour, Valerie observed everything. She watched as Chelsea ignored another customer who didn't fit the store's perceived mold of a luxury shopper. She noticed how Greg's demeanor changed when he interacted with well-dressed customers, his tone warm and accommodating. By the time Valerie left the store, she had seen enough to confirm her suspicions. There was a deep-rooted problem that needed to be addressed. Back in her office later that evening, Valerie replayed the events of the day in her mind. She knew that confronting the issue would not be easy, but she also knew it was necessary. As the CEO, she had the power to make meaningful changes, and she was determined to do so. What Greg and Chelsea didn't know was that their actions had set in motion a chain of events that would soon transform the company in ways they could never have imagined. Valerie picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. "I want a meeting scheduled with the management team tomorrow morning," she said firmly. "We need to discuss the culture in our stores. It's time for a change." As she hung up the phone, Valerie felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it head on. She had fought too hard to get to where she was, and she wasn't about to let anyone, not Greg, not Chelsea, not anyone, stand in the way of her vision for a better, more inclusive future. The next morning, Valerie walked into the boardroom with a determined stride. The management team, seated around the long oak table, looked up in surprise as she entered. Most of them had only met her briefly during her appointment as CEO, and none of them knew about her undercover visit to the store. Valerie wasted no time in addressing the issue. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "Before we get into the agenda, I want to share an experience I had yesterday at one of our flagship stores." The room fell silent as Valerie recounted her visit in detail, from the dismissive attitude of the sales associate to the condescending remarks from the manager. She described the lack of inclusivity and the subtle biases she had observed. By the time she finished, the room was filled with a mix of discomfort and unease. "This is unacceptable," Valerie said, her tone firm. "Windcrest Retail is a brand that prides itself on luxury and sophistication, but that means nothing if our culture doesn't reflect those values. Every customer who walks into our stores deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing." One of the executives, a middle-aged man named Peter, cleared his throat. "Valerie, I'm sure this was an isolated incident," he began. "Most of our staff are trained to provide exceptional service." Valerie's eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, Peter, this is not an isolated incident. What I experienced yesterday was a reflection of a deeper cultural issue within our company. And if we don't address it now, it will only get worse." She turned to another executive, a woman named Linda. "Linda, I want a comprehensive review of our hiring and training practices. We need to ensure that our staff understands the importance of diversity and inclusion. And I want every store manager to undergo bias training within the next month." Linda nodded, jotting down notes as Valerie spoke. The room was silent, but Valerie could feel the weight of her words sinking in. She knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but she was determined to take the first step. The meeting with the management team had set the tone for what would be a transformative few weeks for Windcrest Retail. Valerie's directive was clear: identify the root causes of the bias, take corrective actions, and rebuild the company's culture from the ground up. However, she knew that real change couldn't come from just meetings and memos. It would take hard work, tough conversations, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. In the days that followed, Valerie initiated a comprehensive audit of the company's operations. She hired a third-party consulting firm to evaluate employee behavior, customer experiences, and management practices across all Windcrest stores. The findings were eye-opening. The consultants identified systemic issues, including a lack of diversity in leadership positions, inadequate training on cultural sensitivity, and a customer profiling mindset that many employees had adopted unconsciously. To address these problems, Valerie rolled out a three-part action plan. The first step was mandatory bias training for all employees, from sales associates to senior executives. Valerie herself attended the first training session, sitting among her staff and participating actively. "If I'm asking you to change, I need to be willing to do the same, she told them. Her presence sent a powerful message that she was committed to leading by example. The second step was the launch of a new customer service policy. Valerie personally oversaw its development, ensuring it emphasized inclusivity, respect, and empathy. The policy included clear guidelines on how to treat customers, regardless of their appearance or perceived socioeconomic status. Mystery shoppers were hired to visit stores and report on how well employees adhered to the new standards. The third and perhaps most ambitious step was a restructuring of the company's hiring and promotion practices. Valerie introduced initiatives to recruit from a wider pool of candidates, including partnerships with community organizations and historically Black colleges and universities. She also established mentorship programs to support employees from underrepresented backgrounds in advancing their careers within the company. Despite her efforts, resistance was inevitable. Some employees grumbled about the changes, questioning why the company was making such a big deal out of what they saw as isolated incidents. Greg, the store manager from Valerie's undercover visit, was one of the most vocal critics. During a follow-up meeting with his staff, he openly expressed frustration. "I've been in retail for over 20 years, he said, his voice tinged with irritation. "We've always done things a certain way, and it's worked just fine. Why fix something that isn't broken?" One of the younger associates, a woman named Mia, spoke up hesitantly. "With all due respect, Greg, maybe it hasn't worked as well as we thought. I mean, if customers feel unwelcome or judged, that's a problem, right?" Greg's face flushed, but before he could respond, Valerie, who had joined the meeting unannounced, stepped forward. "Mia's absolutely right," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And Greg, I understand your perspective. Change can be uncomfortable, especially when we've been doing things a certain way for a long time. But the world is changing, and so must we. If we don't adapt, we risk alienating not just our customers, but also our employees." Greg looked down, visibly chastened. Valerie continued, addressing the entire room. "I'm not asking for perfection. What I'm asking for is progress. Every single one of us has a role to play in making Windcrest a place where everyone feels valued and respected. And that starts with how we treat each other, as well as our customers." Over time, Valerie's message began to resonate. The bias training sessions sparked meaningful discussions among employees, many of whom shared personal stories about feeling judged or excluded. These conversations fostered a sense of empathy and understanding that had been sorely lacking before. Managers like Greg, who had initially resisted the changes, started to come around. In one instance, Greg personally apologized to a customer he had dismissed in the past, a gesture that was both humbling and transformative for him. Meanwhile, Valerie kept a close eye on the store, where her journey had begun. She made regular visits, always unannounced, to observe how the staff were adapting to the new policies. On one such visit, she noticed a remarkable change in Chelsea, the sales associate who had ignored her during her first visit. Chelsea now greeted every customer warmly, going out of her way to offer assistance and share product knowledge. When Valerie asked her about the shift, Chelsea smiled sheepishly. "The training really opened my eyes," she admitted. "I didn't even realize how my attitude might come across to people. Now I try to treat every customer the way I'd want to be treated." Valerie nodded, pleased. "That's exactly what we're aiming for," she said. "Keep up the good work." The ripple effects of Valerie's initiatives were soon evident in the company's performance metrics. Customer satisfaction scores began to climb, and positive reviews poured in on social media. Sales also saw a steady increase as more customers felt comfortable and welcomed in the stores. Valerie's leadership had not only improved the company's culture, but also its bottom line. One day during a quarterly review meeting, Peter, the executive who had initially downplayed Valerie's concerns, spoke up. "I have to admit, Valerie, I was skeptical at first," he said, his tone sincere, "but the results speak for themselves. You've made me a believer." Valerie smiled. "Thank you, Peter. But this isn't about me. It's about all of us working together to create something better, and we still have a lot of work to do." As the meeting concluded, Valerie felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced resistance, doubt, and the weight of her own expectations, but she had stayed true to her vision. Windcrest Retail was not just a luxury goods company. It was now a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together to challenge the status quo and build a more inclusive future. That evening, Valerie returned to the flagship store for another unannounced visit. This time, she was greeted with smiles and genuine warmth. As she walked through the aisles, she overheard a customer say to a sales associate, "This place feels so much more welcoming than it used to. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Valerie's heart swelled with pride. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, she knew she was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to pause, take a deep breath, and savor the progress they had made. As she reflected, she recalled the early challenges of her journey. There had been moments when she doubted herself, when the weight of the company's transformation felt insurmountable. But now, standing in the very store where it had all begun, she saw the tangible results of her efforts. This wasn't just about a business. It was about people, about creating an environment where every individual felt seen, respected, and valued. The company's transformation also started attracting positive media attention. Major publications began running stories on how Windcrest Retail had turned its culture around under Valerie's leadership. The narrative was one of resilience, determination, and bold change. Customers, too, shared their experiences, recounting how the stores now felt more inclusive and welcoming. Valerie's next step was even more ambitious. She announced the creation of a Windcrest Academy, a program designed to provide training and career development for underrepresented groups in the retail industry. The academy offered scholarships, mentorship opportunities, and hands-on experience within Windcrest stores. The initiative was a resounding success, further cementing Valerie's legacy as a leader who not only turned a company around, but also paved the way for others to succeed. 1 year after her initial visit, Valerie hosted a company-wide town hall. Employees from across the country tuned in as she shared the story of her undercover visit. She spoke candidly about her experiences and the lessons she had learned. "Change starts with each of us," she said. "It's not always easy, and it's not always comfortable. But when we commit to doing what's right, the results are worth it." The applause was thunderous, and as Valerie looked at the faces of her employees, from sales associates to senior executives, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also been profoundly rewarding. Valerie had not only transformed Windcrest Retail, she had transformed herself, proving that leadership was not about power, but about purpose. In the years that followed, Windcrest Retail continued to thrive, setting a new standard for inclusivity and excellence in the luxury retail industry. And Valerie Davis, the CEO who had started as an undercover customer, became a symbol of what was possible when courage, vision, and determination came together to create lasting change.